Today we're talking about using assessment in instruction, element 3D at the distinguished level. This is the assessment that you use as you are teaching, not the end of the course. For example, the umpire at home plate is going to make assessments as the game goes along. In the same way, the teacher is making those assessments as the lesson is going on. We're talking about two different kinds of questions that you ask with this level, and that is, there are questions that clear up misconceptions, such as, did you hear what we're talking about? Do you know what the assignment is? Versus questions that deepen understanding. Do you know how to use this concept? How would we use that? So the distinguished level teacher uses questions that deepen understanding at this point in time. They will also use questions to clear up misconceptions, of course. But what you do during the instruction part is, if you are looking for deepening understanding, then you use questions that lend themselves to that particular skill. It is very critical at this level that students know the assessment criteria. An evaluator can come into a classroom, a distinguished level classroom, and ask any of the students, what are you doing and why? They will know. They will know what that assessment criteria is, what is expected, how to get a good grade. It is the skill in a nutshell is the teachers have a finger on the pulse of a lesson to monitor instruction. How is it going? Are the kids getting it? There's a critical reason why this happens, and it goes along with the teacher skill in monitoring understanding, because both of those lend themselves to giving proper feedback. If you don't have a finger on the pulse of the classroom and you don't have sufficient skill in monitoring understanding, then feedback doesn't really happen the way it should. Today we're talking about using assessment in instruction. We're looking at 3D, the proficient level. As we talk about using assessment in instruction, it means during instruction. Much like the umpire calls a game as it goes along, the teacher is going to call balls and strikes out and safe, if you will, in terms of student understanding. And they will ask questions that lend themselves to that particular skill. They will use different kinds of questions if they want to know whether or not the students understand what the assignment is and what they're supposed to do. That they will ask questions that clear up misconceptions. But if they want to know how to deepen understanding, they ask questions that deepen understanding, such as, do you know how to use this rule? So, in a nutshell, questions that talk about misconceptions, do you understand the rule? And that deepen understanding, those questions are, do you know how to use that rule? And they ask questions in that regard. The students at this level know what the assessment criteria is. If you ask the students, they will be able to tell you. The teachers at this level have a finger on the pulse of a lesson to monitor instruction in order to give feedback. In addition, they have considerable skill, that of a seasoned veteran teacher, in terms of monitoring student understanding. Again, both of those so that they can provide appropriate feedback. Today we're talking about using assessment in instruction. We're looking at the basic level of 3D, using assessment in instruction. We're talking about assessment not at the end of the lesson, but we're talking about using assessment while the lesson is going on, much like an umpire referees the baseball game as it goes along, calling balls and strikes, these kinds of things, providing feedback to the players as to what is happening. It is not clear at the basic level. That is, the basic teachers have not yet fully gained experience enough to know the difference between the questions you ask to clear up misconceptions, such as, do you know what you're supposed to do? And the questions that deepen understanding. Do you know how to use what you are learning? So the basic teacher is learning those skills, but they are not as smooth as the proficient teacher. They are not as polished as the distinguished teacher. This element calls for having a finger on the pulse of the lesson. The basic teacher is learning how to do that, and it can be a hit or miss thing. The reason they have a finger on the pulse of a lesson is to provide feedback. So they are building their skills. The teacher's skill in monitoring understanding is increasing. Once again, they need to have that skill in monitoring understanding so that they can give proper feedback. It's necessary for providing appropriate feedback. Today we're talking about using assessment in instruction, and we're talking about element 3D at the unsatisfactory level. What we're talking about here in monitoring learning and using assessment is that it is ongoing. It's not the assessment that you use at the end of a lesson. It is the feedback that you provide during the lesson. You're monitoring what's happening, just like an umpire monitors what's happening in order to give feedback to everybody, the audience, the players, everybody, on what is happening and whether or not they're living up to the criteria. So it is critical that you understand that it is assessment that happens during instruction, not at the end. However, the unsatisfactory teacher doesn't understand this, and they usually wait till the end of the lesson to provide instruction or feedback at the end of a lesson, not during. They just do not provide that. At this level, there are two kinds of questions that you need to ask during assessment, during instruction. And they are questions that look for misconceptions, such as, do you understand what you're supposed to do? And questions that deepen understanding. Do you know how to use the things that you are learning? The unsatisfactory teacher does not have these skills and needs additional instruction. For whatever reason, they're not using them. Students know the assessment criteria, not at the unsatisfactory level. They're confused. They're always asking questions. What do we do? Why are we doing this? The unsatisfactory teacher does not have a pulse on the lesson in order to monitor instruction. In this case, the pulse, there is no pulse. The learning in the classroom is dead, if you will. The teachers have they do not have the skill for monitoring understanding, or they haven't developed those skills. Regardless, they need to learn them, because with both monitoring the pulse and raising your skill level, both of those are necessary for providing appropriate feedback. Otherwise, how do you provide feedback? The unsatisfactory teacher does not provide much feedback during the lesson. They usually wait until the end when the kids get their tests back. So that needs to be an ongoing thing during instruction. So if you need help in gaining more skills in this area, feel free to give us a call or talk to your building principal. I'm Scott Shirley from Madison School District. Bye now.